In a quiet library in ancient Athens, a strange man used to walk around asking people uncomfortable questions. He didn't write books. He didn't claim to know everything. In fact, he repeatedly said he knew nothing. Yet he terrified powerful men, confused intellectuals, and irritated ordinary citizens. His name was Socrates. His weapon was not a sword, it was a question. Socrates believed that most people walk through life thinking they understand the world, when in reality they are trapped inside illusions they never question. So he would approach politicians, poets, and craftsmen and ask simple questions. What is justice? What is courage? What is wisdom? And slowly, painfully, their confident answers would collapse. This process, now known as the Socratic method, forced people to examine their beliefs instead of blindly repeating them. But Athens did not celebrate him for this. They executed him. The city accused Socrates of corrupting the youth. But the real crime was something much more dangerous. He taught people how to think. And that same danger exists today. Because critical thinking, the ability to question information, examine assumptions, and challenge authority, is quietly disappearing, not by accident, but by design. In the modern world, information is everywhere. News feeds, social media, podcasts, influencers, endless opinions flooding our minds every minute. Ironically, the more information people consume, the less they actually think. Because thinking requires effort, thinking requires discomfort, thinking requires questioning beliefs that make us feel safe. Instead, modern systems reward something much easier: passive consumption. Psychologists call this phenomenon cognitive laziness. Our brains evolved to conserve energy. Questioning ideas requires mental work, while accepting information requires almost none. So when people scroll through headlines or watch short videos, their brains often accept the message without analysis. But this natural tendency becomes dangerous when powerful institutions learn how to exploit it. Over a century ago, a man named Edward Bernays discovered something unsettling about human psychology. Bernays, often called the father of public relations, realized that people do not make decisions logically. They make decisions emotionally. Then they justify those decisions with logic afterward. Bernays used the ideas of his uncle, Sigmund Freud, to manipulate public behavior on a mass scale. He showed corporations and governments how to engineer public opinion, not by presenting rational arguments, but by triggering unconscious desires, fears, and social pressures. One famous example was his campaign to make women smoke cigarettes in the 1920s. At that time, it was socially unacceptable for women to smoke. So Bernays reframed cigarettes as a symbol of female empowerment. He called them torches of freedom. Suddenly, smoking was not about nicotine, it was about identity. This strategy worked brilliantly, because when people connect an idea to their identity, they stop questioning it. And this is the first death of critical thinking, when beliefs become identity. In the modern digital world, this effect has been amplified beyond anything Bernays could imagine. Algorithms do not care about truth, they care about engagement. Platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram optimize content that keeps users watching longer. And the content that spreads fastest is rarely the most accurate. It is the most emotional. Anger spreads faster than nuance. Fear spreads faster than analysis. Outrage spreads faster than evidence. The result is an environment where people react instantly instead of thinking slowly. Philosopher Daniel Kahneman described this mental shortcut in his research on human decision-making. He explained that the brain operates using two systems. System 1 is fast, emotional, and automatic. System 2 is slow, analytical, and effortful. Critical thinking lives in System 2, but the Internet is designed for System 1, quick reactions, instant opinions, immediate judgment, scroll, like, share, no pause, no reflection. And when millions of people live in System 1 permanently, critical thinking begins to disappear. Another philosopher warned about this long before the Internet existed. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche believed that most people are terrified of thinking independently. Why? Because independent thinking isolates you. If you question social beliefs too deeply, you risk rejection, you risk loneliness. And humans are tribal creatures. We evolved to survive in groups, so subconsciously, people often adopt the beliefs of their tribe without questioning them. Political tribes, cultural tribes, online tribes. Once someone belongs to a tribe, information is filtered through loyalty instead of logic. Evidence that supports the group is accepted instantly. Evidence that challenges the group is rejected immediately. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is one of the greatest enemies of critical thinking. Instead of asking, "Is this true?" people ask, "Does this support my side?" The Internet didn't create tribal thinking, but it industrialized it. Algorithms learn what you like, what you agree with, and what you watch longer. Then they feed you more of the same. Gradually, your digital environment becomes an echo chamber. Everyone appears to agree with you. Opposing ideas slowly disappear from your feed. And when people rarely encounter opposing ideas, their beliefs become more extreme. This phenomenon is called group polarization. Over time, critical thinking is replaced by ideological certainty. And certainty is psychologically addictive because doubt is uncomfortable. Doubt creates anxiety. Certainty creates confidence. But philosophy has always warned that certainty can be dangerous. Socrates himself said something that still echoes today. The only true wisdom is knowing you know nothing. But in a world driven by viral opinions and confident influencers, humility rarely goes viral. Confidence does, even when that confidence is completely wrong. And this creates a strange paradox. Never in human history have people had access to so much information, yet never has misinformation spread so easily. Critical thinking is not disappearing because humans became less intelligent. It is disappearing because modern environments reward thinking less. The systems shaping public attention, media, algorithms, politics, and marketing benefit when people react emotionally instead of thinking critically. Because emotional people are easier to influence, easier to mobilize, easier to control. And that realization leads to a disturbing question. If critical thinking is dying, who benefits from its death? To understand that, we need to explore the psychology of power and the uncomfortable truth that some systems depend on people not thinking too deeply. That story begins with another philosopher who saw the dark side of human nature more clearly than most. A man named Niccolò Machiavelli, and his ideas about power still shape the world today. 500 years ago, a political thinker wrote a book that terrified moral philosophers for centuries. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli. The book was called The Prince. Unlike most philosophers, Machiavelli was brutally honest about power. He did not write about how leaders should behave. He wrote about how they actually behave. And one of his most unsettling observations was this: Most people judge reality based on appearances rather than truth. If a leader appears strong, wise, and moral, people rarely investigate further. Image becomes more powerful than reality. In Machiavelli's words, everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. This insight became the foundation of modern political communication. Because if perception shapes reality, controlling perception becomes the ultimate power. And perception is easiest to control when people stop thinking critically. This is where psychology becomes a tool of influence. In the 20th century, propaganda techniques evolved into something far more sophisticated. They merged with marketing, media, and behavioral science. Governments used them, corporations used them, even social movements used them. The goal was rarely to force people to believe something. Instead, it was to shape the environment in which beliefs form. Because when information environments are carefully designed, people often arrive at the desired conclusion on their own, without realizing they were guided there. This technique is sometimes called manufacturing consent, a concept analyzed by linguist and political thinker Noam Chomsky. Chomsky argued that modern societies rarely rely on obvious censorship. Instead, they shape which narratives dominate public attention. If certain perspectives are repeated constantly while others are ignored, the public gradually accepts the dominant narrative as reality. Not because they'd examined all evidence, but because they rarely encountered alternatives. This creates an illusion of consensus. When people believe everyone thinks this, they stop questioning it. And social pressure reinforces the illusion, because disagreeing with a widely accepted belief carries psychological risks. Humans fear embarrassment. They fear social exclusion. They fear appearing ignorant. So many people silence their doubts. Over time, those doubts disappear entirely. Critical thinking slowly fades. But perhaps the most powerful enemy of critical thinking is not propaganda. It is comfort. Thinking critically is mentally exhausting. It requires patience. It requires reading beyond headlines. It requires admitting when we are wrong. And the human ego hates being wrong. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. When people encounter information that contradicts their beliefs, their brain experiences psychological discomfort. Instead of updating their beliefs, many people reduce this discomfort by rejecting the new information, or attacking the source, or rationalizing their existing view. In other words, critical thinking often loses to emotional self-protection. This is why philosophers throughout history have warned that truth-seeking is not a comfortable journey. It is a painful one. Consider the allegory described by Plato in his famous philosophical story, the allegory of the cave. In the story, prisoners are chained inside a cave their entire lives. They see shadows projected on a wall and believe those shadows are reality. When one prisoner escapes and sees the outside world, he realizes the truth. But when he returns to free the others, they reject him. They prefer the familiar shadows, because truth is blinding when you have lived in darkness too long. This allegory perfectly describes modern information ecosystems. Many people are surrounded by shadows, simplified narratives, viral clips, ideological slogans. Breaking free requires questioning everything: media narratives, political claims, even our own beliefs. But that process is uncomfortable. So many people stay inside the cave, and as long as they stay there, critical thinking remains unnecessary. Yet despite all these forces, propaganda, algorithms, tribalism, cognitive bias, Critical thinking is not extinct. It is simply rare, and rarity creates value. In every era of history, a small minority of individuals have chosen the difficult path of independent thought. Philosophers, scientists, investigative journalists, skeptics. These individuals share one common trait. They are willing to tolerate uncertainty. Instead of clinging to simple answers, they explore complex questions. Instead of defending beliefs like possessions, they test them like hypotheses. And instead of seeking comfort, they seek truth. This mindset was captured perfectly by philosopher Karl Popper. Popper argued that knowledge advances not by proving ideas correct, but by constantly trying to prove them wrong. Every belief must remain open to criticism, because the moment an idea becomes unquestionable, thinking stops. And when thinking stops, progress stops. This is why the decline of critical thinking matters so deeply. It affects science, politics, democracy, education, even personal freedom. A society that cannot question ideas cannot correct mistakes, and a society that cannot correct mistakes eventually collapses under them. But there is also a hopeful truth hidden in this problem. Critical thinking has never been the default mode of humanity. It has always required effort, it has always required courage, and it has always been practiced by a minority. Which means the real question is not why critical thinking is dying. The real question is whether individuals are willing to revive it within themselves. Because every time someone pauses before sharing information, every time someone questions a popular narrative, every time someone admits, "I might be wrong," critical thinking comes back to life, not through institutions, not through algorithms, but through individuals. The same way it began thousands of years ago in the streets of Athens, with a man asking simple questions. A man who believed that the most dangerous thing in the world was not ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge. His name was Socrates, and his question still echoes across history. Are you thinking, or merely repeating what you were told to believe?